Welcome to Inner Compass. I'm Karen Saupe. Out of curiosity, a woman walks into a church. She's offered communion, and it changes her life. She turns the feast into a food pantry, which creates community on a scale beyond what she ever imagined. Hear more about it today on Inner Compass.
From the campus of Calvin College, this is Inner Compass, exploring how people use faith and ethics to guide them through critical issues of today.
My guest today is Sara Miles, director of the food pantry at St. Gregory's Episcopal Church in San Francisco, which serves hundreds of families each Friday. She's written 2 spiritual memoirs, Take This Bread, and more recently, Jesus Freak, Feeding, Healing, Raising the Dead, both of which describe the food pantry and the many lives it has touched. Welcome, Sara.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks.
Glad to have you with us. What would I see at your food pantry on a typical Friday?
You'd see a lot of chaos. But beneath the chaos, you'd see an incredible amount of order. We turn the entire sanctuary of the church into a farmer's market. It looks sort of like a farmer's market in heaven. So there are tables set up all around the interior of the church, right around the altar, and they're covered with food.
And your altar's in the center of the
Our altar's
sanctuary.
right in the center of the room, and all around that are tables covered with fresh food, lettuce and potatoes and huge piles of bread and huge piles of carrots and rice and beans and gigantic stacks of watermelons, and once we even had a pallet of Belgian endive. And in and around these tons of food, literally we give away about 11 tons of fresh food every week, are every imaginable kind of person. We serve about 600 families every week, and it's all swirling around in a great, chaotic, beautiful blur.
There's a long time, a long line and a long wait because you don't rush people through there. You have a few come in at a time, right?
Right. Well, actually, we've now figured out how to improve the lines. It's a constant process of improving things. But I think what we really want to do is make people feel welcome. There's so much that's done to feed people in this country, and so much of it is done in an insulting, punitive way, where people feel they have to be humiliated and wait in lines and prove that they deserve food. And it's shabby and dingy, and you always feed people in the basement. So we wanted to make this beautiful and available to everybody.
So people come maybe as much for the experience of being there as for just to get the food. You don't ask for identification. You don't require them to sign in or maybe you do.
No, we specialize in the undeserving poor. And we like to think that, there's no shortage of food in this country. There's problems of distribution and problems of money, but there's no shortage of food. And certainly we live in California, in the huge agricultural bounty of California. And we don't feel that it's our business to judge who deserves and who doesn't deserve that food.
So anyone can come?
Anyone can come until the food runs out. So we do have systems to make sure that everybody gets the same and people are treated fairly. But we don't ask people to fill out forms. We don't ask them to prove that they are legal immigrants. We ask them to share in the bounty that our farmers produce.
What else do you do to make people feel welcome in the pantry?
Oh, there are all kinds of things. I think part of it is it's a beautiful church. It's very open and airy, and it has huge icons and flowers, and we put out tablecloths and there's candles. So some people come in and use it as a church and sit and pray or ask to talk to somebody. And some people run in and take the food and leave, just like they do on Sunday in church. But I think the most important thing that we do to welcome people to the pantry is that we offer people a chance to participate in the running of the pantry. And at this point, our food pantry is run entirely by people who came to get food and stayed to help out.
Oh, that's neat. Does that happen a lot, that people come once or twice and want to be part of it, or does it tend to be people who've come for a long, long time and feel that they want to give something back?
Well, when we started the food pantry 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago now, we only had 35 people come the first time. And because I'm a bossy kind of lady, I would go out in the line and grab somebody and say, hey, you, can you give me a hand? And then people began to come up to me and say, I could help you with that. Or the worst was the people who came and complained and said, I hate the way you run that thing. You should run the bread table differently. And I was like, buddy, you got a job. So over the years, what's happened is a group of people, some new, some old-timers, have really decided that the Pantry is their program and they're running it. So we have about 50 volunteers every Friday.
And people who come to the Pantry for food must recognize that the folks who are serving them understand them.
Yes, and it's all different kinds of people. It's an amazing diversity. When you come to our food pantry, the volunteers, which is to say the people who get food, you know, the people who work running the pantry include ex-cons, guys with no teeth who live under the bridge, old black church ladies, a Hindu woman in a sari, a bunch of Buddhists, bunch of gay skateboarder kids. Just everyone you could imagine is working together at that food pantry and serving each other. We have translators who speak 5 different Chinese languages, Spanish, Russian, Greek. You'll be at the food pantry and you'll see the most unlikely combinations of people.
Now, are there members of the congregation that help with the pantry too, or has this grown up to be sort of an independent?
It's sort of its own congregation. Yeah. Members of the congregation do work, but mostly it's people who come on Fridays who see this as really their church. And I work, I used to do everything, and I worked myself out of a job trying to give it away. Now what I do is with our priest, Paul Fromberg, he and I cook family meal for the volunteers.
I love that.
So just as at a restaurant, before you open up, everybody sits down and has a meal together, we do that.
That's wonderful.
A lot of our volunteers find the pantry the center of their community life.
And so it gives
week.
them a chance to do something meaningful, to give something back, but also to receive.
You know, people have such a hunger to give. People really want to give something. We had this one guy come who was living in a hotel. He had been on the streets, he was living in a hotel. And he sort of hung around the edges very suspiciously for a while. And then he said to me, you know, everywhere else I've been, people try to get out of work. And here it's like people are running toward the work. And I see that. I see people running toward the work because they want to give something and they want to feel a connection with other people. And there's something so profound and transformative about giving people something freely that they really want.
I was going to guess that maybe people just have this sense of obligation that, oh, I've been taking food from here for so long, I better give something back. But that's not what it sounds like. It sounds more like this is something I'm really excited and eager to be part of.
And proud of the place and proud of how we do it. We had a group of kids come from neighborhood high school, which is, every city has one of these. It's the school where you go when you get kicked out everywhere else, right? So these are kids who've been in juvenile detention. These are the kids who scare adults. When you see them on the bus, you're scared, and they're loud, and they're tough, and they look really thuggy. And their teacher said, well, can they come and help? And I was like, great, that's all we need. But this group of 10 kids came, and they were sort of sullen. They were a little surprised when we sat them down and fed them a meal. One girl said, nobody ever put a tablecloth on for us before. But we fed them, and then we put them to work. And this amazing thing happened over the day, which is 600 adults said thank you to those children. So instead of being the scary kids who the adults don't like, don't look at, they had all these adults look at them and say, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And it just blew those kids away.
Sara, you have some background in writing and journalism, and then you have also some background working in restaurants. And all of this started for you as you recognized the importance of food as a way of creating community. Will you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I think my experience going to church for the first time in my life, in my mid-40s, as a very secular person, was completely physical. It was a physical, spiritual experience, and it centered around eating bread and being given communion at that same table, which now is the center of our food pantry. And I think this is why I understand our volunteers, because that was my experience. I came, I was fed, I didn't deserve it, I wanted to stay and feed other people.
And in many Christian churches, the belief is that you should not receive communion until you've been instructed, until you understand what communion is. But this church, you just wandered in, you were just curious?
Well, it's actually a principle of the church that communion does not belong to the church, but communion is God's, and that God meets people where we are. And so very deliberately they offer communion to strangers. And to anyone who wants the communion, believing that it has the power to change people's lives. And it certainly did change mine.
Yeah, I find that a very powerful moment in Take This Bread, when you talk about receiving the bread and having kind of a whole world of mystery and meaning open up to you.
And in a way that really was not about an idea. I didn't think I now have a logical proof for the existence of God. I knew that I was eating a piece of bread, and I knew that God was alive and in my mouth. And it was so upsetting and frightening that I immediately ran out of the church. But I came back because I wanted to taste that again. And so I see that process of spiritual growth that's rooted in the real world is something that I see happening on all kinds of levels, to people who share food together and people who are willing to open themselves to strangers and to the unexpected.
And so it's no coincidence that when you wanted to organize the pantry, you wanted to organize it around that same altar where you first received communion.
Right, because I believe that that's what centers us. And I also think that when we talk about spiritual transformation, we can imagine that it's something sort of soft edge that happens off in the woods in a really pretty place, and there's sunlight coming down through and making us all look pretty. And in fact, my own moments of spiritual growth, and the ones that I hear about from the people I work with at the food pantry, often can be a lot more raw. They can involve that moment when you're sitting down with a junkie whose feet are hurting, and you look at him and you talk to him, and he offers you comfort and grace.
He offers you comfort and grace.
I think that rubbing up against the people that you didn't necessarily choose for yourself is a pretty good way to open the door to seeing a little more of God.
And as you open yourself up to some of the more difficult people in the pantry, and it seems like part of the ministry is that you spend some time there, that it's not simply you give them food and they leave, but that you're often sitting down to talk to people. They're sharing their stories, and you discover, as you've written, you've discovered that you're in need too.
I do. I discover that I'm in need too. I always feel that I need more time, more food, more attention, more stillness. And I think one of the things that has been surprising to me about the food pantry is that I feel quite at home hanging out with Latino immigrants or street people. I felt completely comfortable at the pantry with that. And I had huge judgments about the people in my church. They were middle class, they were boring, they were entitled, they were always whining about things. And the fact of sitting down over and over with the people from the pantry opened my heart to the people in the church, and to see that the upper class mom with the daughter she was worried about was the same as the Mexican seamstress who was worried about her daughter.
They each have their own struggles.
And everybody has this need for community, and that we can make that for each other.
You have a friend who's a physician who talks about what doctors do and what you do in the food pantry. And you've written, in the short term, we all wanted fixes, we being the doctors and the servers at the food pantry. We all wanted fixes and ego gratification. We wanted to feel good about ourselves, to feel righteous or effective. We wanted the pain to stop. We wanted to get high. We wanted to correctly diagnose and cure the problems in hand. But in the big sense, as Julie said, what we all wanted was meaning. There's a neediness about giving. We give out of our own need, in a way. But that kind of puts you on the same plane with everyone in the room, right?
Well, we are on the same plane. Mm-hmm. Everyone in the world is on the same plane. Mm-hmm. And when we're able to be with each other around real work, mm-hmm. I think what I discover for myself and what the doctor that you spoke about discovered is that we can't necessarily fix or cure everything, but we can enter into a journey together in which the broken pieces of our lives, the sick pieces of our lives, the hungry pieces of our lives get picked up and used to create something between us that sustains us.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, because I think there must be so much frustration in the pantry. You have people, you've written about this, you have people who come in and try to sneak extra or scam the system. You have people out peeing in the bushes. You have neighbors complaining about the behavior of the folks waiting in the parking lot. And you have, as you've already said, people complaining about the way it's being run or what they're getting or not getting. And so much of it sounds very unpleasant.
Doesn't it sound just like every church you've ever been to?
Right. It's way too much like real life. And Jesus hung around with people like that. Jesus
That's right.
spent time with very undesirable people.
I think that's right. And I think there are two things. One is we actually have very clear rules because we want people to be safe. Mm-hmm. So we're not a kind of hippy-dippy, anything-goes California church mm-hmm. or food pantry. We believe, if you're coming to the food pantry, you can be anything. You can be a junkie, you can be a drunk, you can be a criminal, but while you're there, you can't be high. You can't yell at people, okay. You can't shout at people, you can't threaten them. Mm-hmm. So we make the food pantry into a sanctuary, a place where people can be safe and respected. And that's very clear.
But somebody must come in high or drunk sometimes, or yelling and screaming. Do you have to remove them?
Seldom. Really, really seldom. I think what I notice is that creating a community where people are really valued and where they're in charge of what's happening, they're not the subjects of somebody's social work experiment, but they're actually creating a community themselves. It's not that there isn't conflict, but it's that people value it and want to keep it going. So, no, I don't see it as a management issue. Okay. I see it as an issue of love. I think that the difference is that I don't see what I'm doing as social service. It's not a government social service program. It's not a church social service program. Mm-hmm. It's the creation of a community among people.
I love that.
I think that there's a great tradition of good works in the church, and ultimately those don't go very far because what people yearn for is relationship rather than simply being the objects of charity.
But does that then put you in touch with this awareness of bigger problems? You can deal with the symptoms of hunger by offering food, but do you, as you get to know the people that you're serving, do you start looking at the bigger picture of injustices that cause that
I think
inequality?
It's impossible to feed people in this country and not see how completely screwed up the system is. Mm-hmm. And it's a complicated system. I mean, you could delve deep into agriculture and trade policy mm-hmm. and see the ways that food in the United States has become so crazy. And I think that the demand to do more about that, sort of the moral obligation to do more about that, is very real for me as I continue to see who's hungry. We're living on the waste in the system. Mm-hmm. And while we're incredibly grateful that waste includes pallets of fresh oranges and tangelos, there's something wrong with the system in which so many people are hungry and there's so much waste.
If I were going to set up a food pantry at my church, Tell me what to do, and tell me 3 things that I should make sure we don't do.
Very interesting. Don't assume you know what people want. Talk to people and ask them what they want. Don't assume that people want to eat soup in a soup kitchen. Don't assume that people want to have a certain kind of food. Don't try to make rules about who should have food and who can't. Decide how much you can afford to give it away and give it away. And finally, don't do it for people. Do it with people and give away the power and the authority. Let me tell you a story about a group of 4th grade kids that we had come visit us. And 4th graders are obsessed with the idea of justice.
Right.
They care so much about what's fair and what's not fair. And so they had the same kind of questions that a lot of adults do. How come this guy has a car and a cell phone and he's getting food? How come that woman, we gave her food and she complained about it? How come people take advantage of you? And they peppered me with these questions, and it was exhausting, and they kept saying, it's not fair, it's not fair, it's not fair. And finally, all I could really say was, you can't take advantage of us because we're going to give it to you anyway. And this little kid looked at me and said, oh, that means you're invincible.
Wow. That's great. Back to what people want, though, I know I've heard sometimes what they want is not what's going to be really good for them. Do I have a right to say less junk food, more whole grain bread?
Telling people that they should not eat so much sugar and should eat healthy foods, as far as I can tell, does very little to actually change people's behavior. And having rich people tell poor people what's good for them doesn't really go over historically very well in America. I think what helps is actually providing all kinds of food that you can, and assuming that people have the right to make choices about that food. We also noticed something very interesting about produce, which is to the extent that people are connected to community gardens and or have recently come from countries where they've grown food, their connection with eating fresh food is so much greater.
Sure.
So right around the corner from St. Gregory's, there's a huge community garden, and we've begun working with a bunch of city gardeners to deliver their excess to us, and we glean from fruit trees.
And people can see
that. And we bring that in, so it's real.
Okay.
It's not an idea. It's not a set of nutrients on a label. It's something real. You picked the orange from the damn tree and then peeled it and put it in your mouth. That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. What if we were baking the bread right there?
That would be amazing. People connect with it, which is really, why does anybody know what foods to eat? Because you grew up with them and you had some connection to them. And if your connection with your family and warmth and love around a dinner table is around a takeout pizza, that's the food that has meaning for you. If your connection is with bread that your grandma made with you, that's the food that has meaning for you. Again, I think it goes back to the idea that food is so practical, it's so real, and it's so deeply about our spiritual lives.
Right. It's so much more than symbolic, but what I guess I'm trying to understand here is that it's not about you're giving people even the vitamins and the nutrition that they need as much as you're giving them the sense of connectedness to one another, to you, to the people who made the food.
And you know what's great is one of the things that's wonderful in San Francisco is we have immigrants from all over the world who make it their home. And so on any day, you'll see people sort of poking the eggplants or poking some strange looking beans.
See, I don't even know how to do that.
And then they turn to each other and say, well, what do you do with that in your country?
Oh.
Or somebody says, no, try this, Sarah, it's really good, eat it this way. I have to say the beet milkshake left me cold, but it was interesting to see.
Yeah, I'll make a note of that. You make a distinction between curing and healing, and maybe that's a useful place to wrap up here, is that you've said not everybody wants healing, and you note that in the Bible, Jesus asks before he heals.
I think that's one of the most striking things to me in the Bible, which is the trick question that Jesus asks people is not, where does it hurt, or are you good enough? Do you deserve this? Have you washed your hands correctly and said the prayers? He says, do you want to be well? And I'm not the only person who's had moments in my life of not being sure if I wanted to be well. But when someone wants to be well, they can always find healing.
And a big part of what you provide through the pantry, beyond the food then, is the relationships and the community that help bring that about.
And I believe that that really is the ground for healing, and not in a mystical, otherworldly, magical kind of way, but that by eating together, by working together, by listening together, by arguing, by sharing food around the table and learning each other's stories, we find healing together.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. My guest today has been Sara Miles, director of the food pantry at St. Gregory's Episcopal Church in San Francisco, and author of the books Take This Bread and Jesus Freak, Feeding, Healing, Raising the Dead. I'm Karen Saupe. Thank you for watching Inner Compass.